Hi everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Today we are coming here at SINCON with a wonderful topic around continuous security, building security into your pipelines. Now, when we say your pipelines, it might be sounding familiar, but today we will be covering two aspects from different clouds and we will be sharing how we can set up the pipeline in those clouds. And I have my friend developer Steve with me. If you don't know me, I'm Vandana Verma, a senior developer advocate at Sneak. Over to you, Steve.
Thanks, Vandana. So amazing to be here at SINCON, and in particular, well, just geeking out with friends. But hello, for those that don't know me, my name is DeveloperSteve, and I'm one of the senior developer advocates here at Sneak as well. So I come from a long background as a developer advocate, and also as a developer. I've been in the industry many years. As a developer, I've deployed applications from small startup size deployments right through to enterprise size deployments in the past, or as I like to think of it, in my developer origin story. The one thing I've always been I've always enjoyed as a developer is deploying applications with my end users in mind. If you think about it, as developers, we deploy things, or as technology people, we deploy things to basically help our end users' lives in so many different ways, from ordering food, from entertaining, from helping people connect. But the one thing I've always been concerned about through my developer origin story, even before the embracement of the whole shift left or shift left security movement, was what else was being deployed in these components or in these open source libraries or in these open source platforms. What else was being deployed into my infrastructure? And if you think about the holistic iceberg view, that application code that you're deploying, or that part of the deployment process of, is literally just the tip of the iceberg above the surface of the internet, if you will, that's publicly exposed and can potentially open doors into your stack. Over to you, Vandana.
When we talk about open source, is it going to stay here or what it is going to happen? Especially if I talk about open source code, that's a huge amount of code that is part of our own ecosystem. I remember, like way back when I started my career, people used to develop the code themselves, except that they were downloading libraries from the internet, which seems to be very fine at that moment. And we were driving a change wherein we wanted secure code review for our code, like the code which was built in house, and we didn't think about the dependencies which were there. But now, if we look at all the breaches that are happening or that have happened in the past few years, they're specifically around dependencies, they're specifically around open source ecosystem. Now you must be thinking, how much is the open source ecosystem? 80 to 90% on the code is actually open source code, and only 10 to 20% of the code which is written within the organization is the custom code. Now when that's huge amount of code is open source, do we see the bugs coming in? Absolutely. If you see on the screen, we have so many languages, we have so many packages, and there are new vulnerabilities which are coming each year, and open source is becoming the huge part of our own code, which is taking the precedence over anything and everything. And that's why we are here talking about it today. Now, if we move on to the next slide, here, if you see how many of the vulnerabilities which have come into the code, which are from the direct or indirect dependencies, for PyPy, 89%. See, that's a huge work for the direct dependencies. Now, when I talk about indirect dependencies, sometimes what happens is that they are not integrated directly into our code, or they're not directly impacting it, but one of the dependencies is linked with it. And there are many times when there's chaining of a vulnerability within these dependencies. Even if you fix one of the vulnerability, but what happens to the rest of it? They're still impacted. That's like a huge part of it which is still impacted. So what do we need to do? Can we just leave it like that? Can we just not think about it? Or we will say, it's not my baby, I'm not going to handle it. Because if we talk about these breaches, when they're happening with such big companies, they can happen with us also. And what I have seen as a research, that one organization, even a smaller one, use at least 2 to 3 languages, 2 to 3 platforms, which are external platforms, which are open source platforms. And all of us, like even my website, if I talk about it, I have most of the code which is open source. So think about the bugs that might be there, or how they can actually impact my website if I don't keep it up to date. Now let's go ahead and check the next slide and think about what else it actually is going to bring us. And trust me, we are not here to scare you. Trust me, we are not here to tell you that these things are bad. But here we are going to be discussing how we can actually mitigate it as well. So Steve, let's move to the next slide.
Just before we do, I just wanted to point out we are big fans of open source technology adoption and including contributing back. So the thing that we find through some of the vulnerabilities that we've been talking about, through some of the statistics behind the vulnerabilities, is that there's sometimes a delay between the security vulnerability being identified and then it being patched and then a release candidate going out. So, and to the testament of the open source communities, which we really love, they're run by contributors, like they're run by people, passionate people as well, just wanting to each learn from each other and add to the libraries that they're using. So where possible, we know that you probably already are, but we like to highlight that contribute back where you can. It's just nice to be able to contribute back to the community, and in particular, be able to help fix some of the vulnerabilities that are identified. So some of the ways we do that at Sneak, for example, is through a program called Sneak Advisor, which gives holistic information about a particular library's health, from people contributing to bugs being identified and how long they're mitigated, and a release candidate goes out. Also, shout out to anyone that contributes to the Node.js ecosystem vulnerability disclosure program, which we also help manage as well. Well, not even just that program, but all security researchers everywhere. But in particular, big shout out to that group, because this helps keep our end users safe, and this helps keep our community contributions safe. And both programs are a great way to be able to not only identify vulnerabilities as soon as they're identified by the security researchers, but then also being able to get fixes out and keep those end users safe.
Now, it's hard to imagine the days of writing software without any open source dependencies. And managing dependencies for a project is an important task, which requires due diligence to correctly keep the track of all the libraries that we depend on. And after all, the applications that we are deploying bundles our code as well as our dependencies. So we have a foot in the door with security of open source dependencies. So what exactly we're going to be doing with that? And when we talk about these open source dependencies, how much are we trying to update that? How much are we trying to cope up with them? How much are we dealing with them? That's a very, very big aspect. And on top of it, I know a lot of friends, if something doesn't work, let's go ahead and check on the internet and download it and just start using it. And the most important part, who cares about security? And here we two people, like one is a developer and another person is security person, seeing together, talking together about these things, because we know half of our foot is inside the house and other foot is outside the house, with the direct dependencies and indirect dependencies which we have to handle. And then if we don't handle it, we would see all those vulnerabilities which we have seen in the past, and that's one thing. But then the breaches that comes alongside, like that's a huge case. Now talking about the other slide, and especially cloud native, that's going to be eating up the whole internet, because when we are moving to cloud, we have to manage our applications. We have to understand how the code is written for the cloud native applications, and the whole the base that we are going to be hosting it. Earlier, what used to happen, developers were only managing the in-house code, custom code. Did we change that? Absolutely, we changed that. We started having a lot of open source components. Then we said, oh, you have to manage this open source component. Then we said, oh, now we are moving to cloud. You have to manage the cloud as well. Then comes other parts. especially the cloud native, the whole ecosystem comes into picture. And we say, you have to manage this as well. Now, a developer is supposed to write a code, good code for the application and for the organization. Suddenly, they have to take care of the code. They have to take care of third party code. They have to take care of third party vendors. They have to take care of cloud native applications and ecosystem and cloud itself. I have seen developers juggling around it, and that's when we have to think from a perspective where our code is suffering. Whatever we say, our code is going to suffer if we don't do it right, if we don't add security to it, and if we don't have the right bandwidth and strength to do it. That's the major part. Over to you, Steve.
Just adding to that too, and one of the things I've always loved as a developer, well, it's kind of a love-hate really, is yeah, now with cloud native in particular with containerization, I can now as a developer be able to have a YAML configuration file that like deploys infrastructure with my code, which is kind of cool, but at the same time, it is a lot of responsibility to adopt. When you think containerization, for example, the choosing the right base image to use, having security set up, having a nice secure environment running alongside of the infrastructure with it. It is a lot of responsibility to take on, and knowing which permissions to set, which configuration to have in place, and also which base components to have installed with a container at the base image level. If you think of Docker, for example, there's over 242 billion container downloads from Docker Hub to date, which is phenomenal. And from the development side of things, I can build in a containerized environment locally, and then use that to be able to deploy onto infrastructure with elasticity, which is great because ultimately we build these applications and deploy onto infrastructure with the idea that we're basically going to be building an amazing application that gets a super fast adoption. Alongside that, you can basically have infrastructure that scales as you need it to. So gone are the days of building the super big monoliths and then having to deal with mitigating traffic through a multiple of servers. This infrastructure grows as you need it to.
And if we talk about containers, containers are again becoming a big part of our ecosystem. They seem to be very small, but I have heard people saying that they are securing everything and they are taking care of the whole piece of application. But what about security? And even the security people I've heard saying that containers are the most secure place for application. Did you hear that, Steve?
I have heard that before.
Yeah, and fun fact is, if we are using the outdated images, if we are using the vulnerable images, then can we say that we are secure? No, we cannot say that, and that's when comes a big problem. That how exactly are we trying to use them? How exactly we are trying to update them? And on top of it, are we using the right images? That's the most curious part, that if we don't use the right images, there have been places wherein people have downloaded images and they had malwares installed in them. Now, you are using an image and that's like vulnerable from inception. Where the things will go, the things will stay vulnerable. Or you have a nice application built on, but then some of the components as part of the container that has gone outdated and there are new updates to it, and for a year and a half or two you don't update it. Do you think that you're still safe? No, you're not. That's when comes a point wherein we need to keep updating these images. We need to use the updated version of the images and the components installed in it. And when we talk about that, it's not because containers make up of like the whole ecosystem. It's in itself, it's like a mini world in itself. So it's important that whatever it bundles up, that's secure. And we did an open source security survey and we figured out that there are so many official container images which are actually found to be vulnerable. Now think about, Steve, that there are official images and then they are vulnerable. Like that's a very tricky part.
Yeah, I know, and I'm still finding like ones today. Like I'm gonna say it. I'm a big PHP fan, And even scanning like the Docker Hub supported PHP base image, there's so many vulnerabilities in there, which I mean kind of makes sense given what we were just talking about earlier in the presentation too, with some of the vulnerabilities being discovered in open source libraries and dependencies. Because a lot of these base images are built from those same open source components that we were looking at and talking about. So the way I really like to think about this, and again, this is about protecting our end users. Like as technology folks, this is why we build these applications. This is why we build these experiences. So the way I like to think about this is, with great containerization comes great responsibility. I love that me.
Absolutely. And then comes the portion which is infrastructure as a code. And when we talk about infrastructure as a code, what exactly are we trying to say? Specifically, if I have to say that, the most important aspect in the cloud these days is infrastructure as a code. We want to spin up our instances as fast as we can. And we want to make sure that these buzzwords which are there, which actually are making up the whole ecosystem, talk about the AWS cloud storage, S3 buckets, or when we talk about Kubernetes containers, all of these seems to be buzzwords. But why are we even discussing about these things like bucket storage, Kubernetes, Firebase deployed applications? Because these are nowadays the cloud infrastructure, and that has been completely abstracted in the form of a code itself. Like if you need to spin up anything, and not just anything but the whole infrastructure, use a code and you can deploy. And today we deploy and scale resources as fast as code, like literally in the lightning speed. And so it's the incredible power that could actually provide us a lot of leverage and a lot of freedom. But at the same time, the mistakes within this infrastructure as a code, the configuration, which can create a lot of chaos for us. So all of these things are good. So network access to storage to servers, because we want it as fast as we can. But it is getting big and big. And when I say that, there is a big but in that, which is actually creating the whole concern. And think of a situation wherein we are trying to deploy a Kubernetes, and then the Kubernetes file that we have, it has some crucial security issues. Maybe the container port, which is not supposed to be open and there, but it's open. Or maybe one of the issues with the Kubernetes is that that if I had a container running without root user control, the pod level security directive might be able to get work. But then there are certain concerns with that. So let's go ahead and start talking about our demo, right?
Oh, so keen for the demo, and it's totally going to work first time.
Yeah. No, that doesn't happen. And always God, the demo gods don't shower their blessings on us. It has happened wherein I'm on the stage giving a talk and my demo doesn't seem to be working because I just tried 5 minutes before and it was working. So that's
Every
like,
time. Every time.
yeah.
Wait, I have a scene for this if it does happen. This is fine.
Let's see.
This is fine.
Yeah, let's go ahead and see what happens. There is no fire in that, right?
That's right. We like to
Yeah.
live dangerously sometimes.
So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a new pipeline for you. And I have my code on Bitbucket Cloud and GitHub, but I'm going to go ahead and start using GitHub here. And I have a lot of repositories which I can use. And it asks me that every time which one I want to do it. So here, if you see that I have my own website, I have .NET, I have Java. So let's go ahead and run this Java form. And I'm going to get this Java code into the pipeline. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and approve and install. It's going to take a couple of seconds authorizing me, and then that's all. I'm going to be in. Now, the first time it's a bit slow, but next time I think it's going to work really, really fast. Now, when I'm running this, I want a simple Azure pipeline with a YAML file, and I'm going to create as a master folder and go ahead and say Azure pipeline YAML. That's all. Now, if you see this file, this seems to be very, very simple, right? But it's going to go ahead and create an image, create a master file, and then run some scripts. I've mentioned everything, and even it's going to install the npm. But here, as part of this, I want to have something like either I can run it, which I'm going to do now, or I can add some code to it, which we really want to do. Now, especially if I say secure pipeline, we need to have some code basis. Now, while the pipeline is running, I want to go back and show you that as part of the whole organization settings, I can have some extensions which is going to help me for the longer run. Now, what are these extensions? If you see here, I have a sneak security scan, which is free. I have Zap proxy, which is Zetattack proxy. There's a Zap scanner, and then there's a dependency check, which is one of my favorites. Now, let me show you how exactly you can install it yourself. I'm going to go ahead and go to the browser store and say dependency check. Now here I can see that there are some of them and it's OWASP dependency check. I'm going to go ahead and get it for free. Even though I have installed, it's going to check whether I have it or not. I'm going to say your download has started. So it has actually started. The other version, I had it. To show it to you, I made sure that this is there. There are n number of products which are there, which you can use it. And that's what I do. I have these listed here, which I can do that. Now, let me go ahead and show you that here it's installed. There's certain things you will request to your admin or share with people. Here I am an admin, so I can play around with it. Now, the most important part is that how do you actually fit it into your code base? That's the most important part. Now, let me go ahead and go to my project. And here I'm going to go to my pipelines. And if you see that it's already running now. Now, I want to play around with it. So I'm going to go ahead and go to edit because I want to have security as part of my pipeline. Now, what exactly I want. So I just installed a plugin for dependency check. I'm going to go here, mention a project name, say Java, or maybe SINCON, and then provide a scan path that what exactly the path would be. And so we'll say this. And then if I want to exclude certain path, report format, I'm a huge fan of CSVs. So I'm going to put an XML and CSV. And then I want only one found violations, experimental analysis, and then few other things that I want. I'm going to go ahead and add to it. Now this code is becoming part of my code. Here, I don't want to start it at the beginning, but I want it after the script has run. So I can write any other thing, or I can just put the settings here. And even before, once the setup is done, I can put it here as well. Similarly, you must be thinking that I've installed Sneak security scan also. So Sneak, I'll just say Sneak, and then what application, container image, what I really want to scan, testing threshold, and then Sneak monitor if I want to run it. Now I'll say add. So here, why it has added automatically, because I have already configured Sneak, wherein it has taken my API token, and I'll just go ahead and save it. See, it says branch master and file path resource not accessible. Now you have to give a right path for it if you want to get it scanned. So here I did this. So I'll say, okay, let's leave it for now. I don't want dependency check, but let's go ahead and start using this. So here I can go ahead. Strange. Create a new branch and start saving it.
We can do this again.
No, wait.
Murphy's Law.
Yeah.
You didn't pray to the demo gods, did you?
Yeah.
So when
So
you're
here,
just, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'm ready. I'm just going to come back here. Okay. Now, when we do that, we can actually play around with other pipelines as well. Like I have this pipeline, which is one of my favorites, wherein let me show you this. I have a lot of things installed as part of it. Here I have a WAF in front of my application, which is going to be running some of the rules on this pipeline. And then it is checking container registry and doing a lot of things here. And here, if I want to add something more, I will just go ahead and go to assistant and go ahead and start using sneak. Here I am going to be using my sneak token, and I'm going to go ahead and start adding and saving. Now, this is what is going to happen. Now, when I save it, it's going to go ahead and save it. And then if there is an error, I can go ahead and take a look at it. Or I can go ahead and start using maybe master and go ahead and run it. So it actually depends where exactly you want to commit, what you want to test it. There will be times when you will fail. And as I said, that demagogues don't shower their blessings every time. And here I did a lot of goofs, which I checked. I did a lot of testing with different practices and see there are few which are failing, and I can check where exactly the issue is. I can figure out. Similarly, if there is a security issue or if there is a problem there, it will highlight or it will fail the pipeline. So you can decide that. Now coming to you, Steve.
I absolutely love, I'm not a lazy developer, but I absolutely love automated pipelines in particular, because when things work well, once they're set up and all everything's up and running, like you can put some really nice gate controls in there so that you run when you deploy, you run test scripts, you run your security scripts, and then if everything checks out, then everything gets deployed. It's always important to be reviewing those scripts to make sure they're current, capturing everything, and also, like you were showing too, that you've got to check the logs. Always have to check those logs because you never know what's hiding in them. They've got always such handy things to be able to look at. But also, yay! I'm so glad that demo was an amazing demo. The other thing too is there's all the cloud platforms have a really nice CI/CD pipeline setup that you can use. So it's always so easy to be able to get something like that up, whether you're using GitLab, GitHub, Bitbucket, or anything else you might in repository land. The thing I love again is just that getting that nice seamless automation up and running. But we missed something very important. If you think back to that holistic iceberg stack, we had the dev environment at the very top, which of course is being deployed on top of our open source world. And then on top of that, we've got our containerization. And then at the very bottom of our iceberg, the whole iceberg holistic stack, we have IAC, which is kind of how our current SDLC works these days. But if you think about it, there's a whole other component which we're now also seeing vulnerabilities start to surface in as part of that iceberg. And that is the development environment. Now, as a developer, I've been developing since the age of 8. So back in the days of QBasic, for those that remember it. But this one really, really, really scares me because this starts to affect the local host environment. So Homebrew, for example, back in April had a security incident disclosure. This is actually still on their blog. Some of the extensions, some of the libraries being used as part of a brew install things, for those that use this Mac, there was some vulnerabilities and some security holes being identified as part of the ecosystem, which again, like that scares me one of the most vulnerability types, because that's my local host. That's where I build these things. So one of the places that we're also seeing, and Sneak disclosed this recently, but we're also seeing the same vulnerability types in developer ecosystem or developer tooling ecosystems, like in VS Code, for example, which has over 14 million monthly users and 25,000 extensions in its ecosystem. So, and again, this one scares me the most because that's my local host. That's where I build stuff. Don't put vulnerabilities there. But in particular, like the one vulnerability we'll be demoing in our other session is a file traverse or remote file traversal on a host developer computer, essentially. So you can see why this scares me the most. Literally, this enables a remote attacker to be able to grab a password file from your computer, basically, which we've actually demonstrated on a live stream. So anyway, check out that session. It's totally worth seeing. And also there'll be code available. Actually, the links on here as well, but come see us do it because it's so much fun.
Ah, interesting. So we're almost at the end of the hour. Generally, we don't want to come this way, but then we have to end. So here, we need to make sure that we prefer minimal images when we talk about containers and act fast with those base images. And when we talk about that, we also need to make sure that we take care of our whole supply chain. And are we going to have less secure or more secure open source ecosystem? When we are talking about building our security pipeline, what are we going to have? We have to make sure that we are scanning them properly. Because if we don't scan them, whatever we do, it is never going to help us. Because we have the vulnerabilities in our pipelines, and what are we going to do with all the thousands and thousands of tools that we are going to have?
Totally correct. And again, like the thing I love most, particularly about building security gates, I call them security gates, but you know what I mean. But building security gates into pipelines is like you can put those nice gates in there so that you have those final checks go into place. I mean, it's like launching a spaceship into orbit. You have all those checks in place before you take off, and then you launch the website or you launch the app. It's kind of a grandeur way to think of it, but you know what I mean. Like you have those nice checks in place so that you can make sure everything's nice and safe. And like Vandana was saying, like always make sure you're scanning source code containers and infrastructure, just to keep those end users nice and safe and keep your infrastructure safe as well.
So we just had a sneak con, and there were some amazing sessions. If you want to tune in, all the sessions are recorded and put it on the website, so you can actually check them out.
All right,
So
cool.
we have a sneak ambassador program wherein we are actually inviting all the passionate people who are into application security, who are devs and love doing application security. You can become a sneak ambassador and help the community at large. We have a lot of things, we have a lot of resources to help you out, but we need people to actually take the word forward wherein we say that we want developer first application security and we want to build our community security. That's the first and the foremost thing for us.
And just lastly, always remember to use your tech superpowers for good and always be excellent to each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.